In the last ride video I made, I pointed out that I'm going to stop using these Enduro Engineering motor roost guards and fit some wraparound guards. So today's video is going to be showing what I decided to use and the installation. Before we start the Handguard install video, I want to give a shout out to Rado at Dirt and Iron. Earlier this week in one of his videos, he said some really nice things about the Tokyo Off-Road channel, so I wanted to return the favour. In many ways, Rado is pretty similar to me. He's a long-time dirt bike enthusiast, loves working on his bikes and also loves riding. Just recently, he started a KTM 2004 250SX rebuild series, and he's going to be building that into a 300 off-road bike. And he's got a series of videos up. Right now it's up to part 11, and it shows him stripping down the bike and rebuilding it. So really interesting series of videos. If you're interested in that, definitely check out the Dirt and Iron channel. So these are the wraparound handguards I decided to use. It's a set made by Cycra, and it's called the Series 1. And it comes with two bars, two shields, bar end mounting hardware, and screws to secure the shields. What it doesn't come with is clamps to attach this end of the bar to the handlebar, so you need to purchase that separately. The reason I decided to buy this set is the bars are made from 6061 aluminium, so they're strong and light. The bend design is nice and simple. It's just got a slight bend here where it attaches to the bar end, and the shields are fairly low profile and a nice simple design. Also, the price of this set is pretty reasonable. I think one reason is it doesn't include the handlebar clamp system, and I'd already decided I want to use a different mounting system made by BRP, and didn't want to pay extra for some handlebar clamps that I'm not going to use. So this set turned out to be ideal for me. And here you can see the clamp system I decided to buy. It's made by BRP, and the part number is BMI 9254. It comes with two clamps and the mounting hardware. And the clamps are really nicely made, nicely machined. They mount onto the lower handlebar supports, clamping the handlebar, and then the handguard bolts onto here, and there's three positions. So you've got a bit of adjustability depending on the length of the handguard. The big advantage of using a mounting system like this is the guards are a lot less likely to slip round when you hit something, because this position is fixed. With regular clamps that just clamp onto the handlebars, they can slide around quite easily, and you're constantly adjusting the position when you have crashes. So these are a little bit expensive, but very nice, very strong. And I've actually already fitted these to my 2019 TPI. And then for the handguard bar end mounting system, the set comes with some mounting hardware like this. You tighten it, it pulls this into here, and this splays apart and grips the inner bar surface. One issue can be in a heavy crash, it can move and pull out, and then you have to stop and readjust it. So I decided to make some threaded inserts and thread the bar ends and thread lock these in place, and that should be a lot stronger in crashes and never pull out. The inserts I made, the external thread M16 and the internal thread is M8. Okay, the first part of the install is to remove the grips and existing handguards. I'm using lock-on grips. The left-hand grip, you need a T15 Torx bit to unscrew here, and just unscrew it, loosen it off, and then you should be able to pull it off. So that's very easy. If you've got glue-on grips, cut them and then just pull it off, and then you have to clean all the glue off. And then to remove the handguards, these ones are just held on with M6 fasteners. They have an 8mm head, so you just need to remove those two bolts. And then on the throttle side, you'll need to remove the throttle tube, so you need to disassemble the throttle housing. I like to take the 2 bolts out first before taking the rubber boot off, and that way the rubber boot holds the 2 halves in place until you're ready to take it off. So that's the 2 bolts loose, and I've taken them out, and then you can hold it, slide the rubber boot off, and then remove the 2 halves. And then you can take the throttle cable out and slide the throttle tube off. And then remove your old handguard. Okay, I'm going to use some brake cleaner and clean off the handlebar underneath where the throttle tube sits. Before I reassemble it, I'll spread in dry lube. Okay, next I'm going to install the bar clamp handguard mounts, and to do that you need to remove the bar pad and then remove the top handlebar clamp mounts. So the KTM one is just held in place with 2 zip ties, so just clip it and remove it. Okay, then before you remove the top clamp, you want to make a note of the angle your bars are at, so when you put the new clamps on, it doesn't change position. One way is to look at the marking here and line that up, but it's a little difficult to see on this one. I'm using a one-piece clamp here, so it's kind of tricky. So I decided that I'm going to put a little bit of tape on here and mark where the lower clamp lines up with that tape, and then when I reassemble I can just rotate and I won't have to play around with the position a lot. It's a shame I won't be using this top clamp. I really like this one-piece design. It stops the lower clamps rotating, so it's a good design, and it's lasted really well. There's absolutely no bending on it, but I won't be able to use it with the new Handguard BRP mounts. Okay, so the BRP handguard mounts, they come with hardware like this. This is a 30mm M8 bolt. It has a hex head, which I'm not really over keen on. It's quite easy to round these out. So I've decided not to use those. And the standard KTM bolts are 25mm long, so they're a little bit short because this is a little bit thicker than stock. But I had some 30mm M8 bolts, and I'm going to be using these instead. So these have a hex head which you can use a socket on, and also Torx inner part. And I much prefer this design of bolt, much less likely to have issues. So I'm going to be using those. When mounting the upper barrel clamps, I don't use thread lock. It's not mentioned in the service manual that you should use thread lock either, so I don't think it's necessary. Okay, so I realigned the bars to the mark where I had the tape, I've taken the tape off already, and I've aligned them left and right so the spacing is equal. And I've hand tightened the bolts loosely to hold the bar in place. Next I'm going to torque the bolts to 20 Newton meters. And you want the gap between the clamps equal, front and rear. So go to and fro until both of the bolts torque, and then go back and make sure the gaps are equal. If they're not, loosen them off and adjust it. Okay, so that looks good now. Okay, now I'm going to reinstall the bar pad, and underneath it has this plastic spacer which holds the zip ties in the correct position. So I'm going to reuse that and then use 2 new zip ties. Okay, so next I'm going to cut the internal threads on the handlebars so I can install these threaded inserts which I made. The thread dimensions are M16 and the pitch is 2.0, so I have a tap to match that. This is a plug tap, so the initial threads are tapered and then it goes straight. It should make it easy to align with the hole in the handlebars. And then I have a fairly large tap wrench. M16 is quite big, so you need quite a bit of leverage, so a large tap wrench like this is useful. And then I made a tap guide. So this hole actually has got 2, because the Renthal handlebars on the left hand side is knurled and the right hand side is obviously not knurled because the throttle tube sits on there, which makes it slightly different dimensions. So I've made 2 bores, one to mount on the throttle side, one on the knurled side, and then inside I think you can see there's a smaller bore which is the right size for the tap to pass through without any wobble. So I can push this onto the end of the handlebar and have the internal bore line up with the handlebar bore, and then tap the hole accurately without it going off center. So if you don't have that, you'll have to either eyeball it, or you can use something like this, just a steel rule, lay it on the handlebar, and then once you've got the tap started, check that the spacing around the tap is equal and it's lined up. So you can do it without a guide like this, but it should be a lot easier with the guide. And before you start tapping the hole, M16 tap requires a 14.2 millimeter bore, and I've just measured the handlebars and it's 14.35. So it's very slightly larger than the recommended bore, but I think for this application it's going to be no problem, especially as I'm going to be using some thread lock to hold them in place. So I certainly don't need to drill it out any further. Okay, so now I'm ready to start cutting the thread, and you want to calculate how deep you want to go on the thread. So the inserts I made are 25 millimeters long. Remember that a plug tap like this, the first about 4 threads are tapered, so you'll want to cut deeper than that. So I've estimated that I want to go 40 millimeters, and with the guide on, just so happens that when the guide touches the tap wrench, then I've gone deep enough. So that's pretty easy for me to understand. So I can put the guide on, and then I put some oil onto the threads of the tap, and then I can start cutting. So I hold the guide in place. And then once you've put it on a little way, you want to break the chips, so reverse it a little bit. And And now I can feel it going on straight, so I can use two hands and break the chips every half turn or so. Okay, I'm getting near the depth required, so maybe one more turn or so. A little bit more. And that should be good. So it was able to cut the threads fairly easily, but this tap wrench is fairly large, so I think you'd have big problems trying to use a small tap wrench. So if you don't have one, definitely a good idea buying a large one like this. This is probably slightly over 30 centimeters. Right, next I'm going to use some compressed air and blow out all the chips. Be careful doing this and make sure I don't get in your eyes. Good idea to wear some eye protection. Okay, then I'm going to use some brake cleaner and then blow it out again. And there you can see the thread it's cut, so it's cut them really cleanly. Very pleased with those. Okay, so for this application, I'm going to use some Loctite 263, which is red Loctite high strength, and install the thread inserts using this. I don't want them coming loose, so I use the red. If I do need to remove them for some reason, I'll have to heat this area and melt the thread lock a little. But that's not really an issue. I'd be more concerned about them coming loose and turning round than not being able to get them out. So just put a small amount, you don't need a huge amount, and then screw them in. And I've cut a threaded slot in the end of the inserts, so I'm just going to put them in just slightly further than flush, so it doesn't interfere with anything, and that looks good there. And then it's a good idea to let the Loctite cure before fully assembling the handguards. So you can go ahead and mount the handguards, but you shouldn't insert the bolt until the Loctite is cured. I would give it at least a couple of hours, 2-3 hours, by which time it should be about 50% strength. But really it's better to leave it overnight or a day or two if you can. Okay, then the throttle side, because on the rental bars the diameter is slightly smaller than the left-hand side because there's no knurling, I've made my special tool bore slightly smaller to fit on here accurately. And then I've cleaned off the tap and added some more oil, so I'm ready to start cutting the thread on this side as well. And then remember to back off every half turn to break the chips. Okay, so that's full depth now, so I can remove the tap, and I've just got to clean it out and install the threaded insert with red Loctite. So it's the same method as the left side, so I'm not going to show that. The next step is to fit some grips. I like the lock-on grips, the ODI ones, and the stock grips have a closed end, and if you want to use stock grips you'll need to open up a hole so the bolt can pass through, and I'll show you how to do that. But you should note that KTM do have the lock-on grips with the open ends as well, so I'll put the part number in the description of the video in case you want to buy those. To open up a hole in the end of the grip, there's various methods you can use. The ODI grips, underneath the rubber, it's hard plastic, So it's not that easy to cut, and my preferred method is to use a compressed air die cutter like this with a carbide bit. You need to be very careful. These are very sharp and you can easily cut yourself, so if you're not used to using one of these, probably not a good idea, and just get the grips with the holes in. But if you do have a die cutter and carbide bit, you can use it carefully to create a nice smooth hole. So initially you can drill a hole to get started, but I just plunge cut into it and then open the hole up. So you need to hold it carefully and don't slip. And you can see there the carbide cutter creates a nice smooth hole, and it cuts the rubber nicely as well. So it's very quick and leaves a good finish. But as I say, the carbide cutter is very sharp, and you need to be very careful. If you slip, you can easily cut yourself. Okay, as I already have these pre-cut grips, I'm going to be using these. So here's what you get in the lock-on grip set. Obviously 2 grips. This is the left-hand grip and the throttle side grip. And as I mentioned, this end is open. If you want the closed one, it's a different part number. And then you get 3 different cams. The large one on the right is the carb model cam, and these 2 are for TPI bikes. So TPI have a push-pull throttle system, so there's 2 holes for the cable. And the grey one is a tamer cam. It comes fitted stock on the bike. And the black one is a more responsive cam. So I'm going to be fitting the grips to my 2017 carb model, so I'm going to be using this cam. And to fit it, it's pretty easy, it just presses on, but there is an orientation. So if you look carefully on the throttle tube, there's a mark in one place, it's a square mark. And then if you look on the cam, there's a square mark here as well. And from this angle, you can probably see the marks a little more clearly on the cam and the throttle tube. So line those up, and then once they're lined up, you need to press down. Make sure the outside mark is facing away from the throttle grip, and then you need to press down hard, and it snaps into place like that. Here you can see one of the bars and the shields supplied with the kit. One thing I was a little bit concerned about is there's only 2 holes, so you mount it on the bar like this and use 2 bolts there. One thing I was worried about is if you fall off and the bike goes backwards, it's going to pull on this area and probably crease across there. So I did some research online, and I found KTM have a shield. It's actually exactly the same. It's just been rebranded with a KTM sticker, but one thing it does have is an extra hole here. So I bought some of those. They're only about 20 bucks on Amazon, so pretty cheap. And I lined it up with the original holes and then drilled an extra hole and tapped it. The original holes are M5 0.8 pitch. So I made the extra hole exactly the same dimensions, so M5 0.8. Regarding the shield mounting hardware, the bolts supplied with the kit are like this. You get a total of 4 bolts. And as I'm going to be using an extra hole, I needed some extra ones. So I found some nice ones online. The M5, the length is 13 millimeters, but they have a hex head, and they're about the same diameter, so they should hold the shields nicely and also be easier to do up than this screwdriver type head. The bar end mounting hardware supplied with the kit is shown here, and you'll note it has quite a long shoulder. With the supplied hardware that's not an issue, but I'm going to be using the threaded inserts, and you can see here when I push it through the bar, the shoulder protrudes quite a long way and would not thread into the insert, so that creates an issue. So I had to get some new bolts, and the ones I found are these ones, very nice quality. They have a hex head, and the length is 35 millimeters. And when inserted, it sits completely flush with the bar, which I really like. And that's just the right length to go into the insert. And you'll note it doesn't have a shoulder like the other bolts, so no problem there. So if you're going to be using inserts, you probably won't be able to use the supplied bolts because of this shoulder issue. Okay, so now I'm ready to mount the handguard bars. If you're using BRP mounts, you should note that this angle is fixed, and because the bar sits on it when it's bolted, you can have alignment issues at the bar end. So do a test fit and figure out whether you need to tweak the bend at all. In my case, I put this part of the bar in a vise, and using these Nipex, I basically twisted the bar a little bit round that way, and that resulted in the alignment being perfect. So I've done both sides now. Okay, so now I'm ready to mount the bar, and I've applied some Loctite 243 medium strength Loctite, and I'm going to do the same to the bar end mount. I don't want them kind of loose easily. Okay, I'm now ready to assemble the throttle, and before I do, I'm going to spray some dry lube on the handlebar and also inside the throttle tube. It's a good idea with dry lube, which contains PTFE, to shake it well before you use it. And I'm going to put some on the cam as well. And I'm going to coat inside the throttle housing as well here. Okay, now I can install the throttle and put the throttle cable in, and then the throttle housing. And the two halves of this throttle housing simply bolt together. And then you want to position your throttle so there's a gap between the grip and the bar. You don't want it rubbing on there. And then when you've adjusted the position, you can slide the boot back on. And then I can install the bar. And for the shield bolts, I'm using Loctite 243, just a small amount, just to prevent them coming loose. Be careful not to cross thread the shield bolts, and also not to over torque them. Okay, so that's the install of the handguards complete. I think they look really good, and with the BRP center mounts, they should be really strong and not shift in crashes, so I should be able to use them for a long time with no issues.